oil trading a little higher this morning, but nothing too substantial, up about 0.5%, above $71 a barrel on Brent. And as we look to the month of February, we're certainly trading below the highs of the month so far. Whether we're going to see anything pop at the last month, the sort of high of trading during the month is closer to $72, and at least at the moment, we're trading closer to $71 a barrel. Let's kick off this morning in the center of it all, at least where the world is focused on, in Tehran. Daniel Rahmat, Senior Energy Security Consultant based in Tehran, Iran. Daniel, I suppose just on a very general human level, what's the mood in Tehran like? Does this feel like something imminently bad is about to approach, or is there some optimism growing that maybe we can find an off-ramp? Your thoughts at the moment?
Hello, Sean. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here again. Look, the problem at the moment in Iran is not limited to the possible upcoming war with Americans. You know, we had a very huge and unprecedented uprising here in terms of the numbers of people in the streets and the level of the crackdowns and the level of the death. There are many different statistics coming out. No one can confirm either of them, but a huge number of people were killed in the streets of Tehran and other cities. And the risk of an American invasion on Iran is very high. And due to such a big catastrophe Iran experienced in the crackdowns, the system has a crisis of legitimacy to mobilize the people to resist. So that would increase the risk of an American attack. At the same time, we are witnessing new problems. A huge number of Kurdish separatist guerrillas, most probably supported by American military, are heading towards Western Iranian borders, which would take them into Iranian territories in the case Americans launch a strike on Iran, and there is the possibility of preemptive attack from Iranian side on their positions to prevent them entering Iran before any American strike. So the situation is very complex. At the same time, Turkey has very significant concerns about the instability in Iran, which would cause to actually security risk on the Turkish borders as well. And Iranian-backed militias in Iraq are now threatening the Kurdistan region to step in if the Kurds attack Iranian territory. So you see, it's a big mess going on around. Pakistan and Afghanistan are hitting each other. Economic situation in Iran is getting worse and worse. Things are worsening. And there is a very high level of possibility that Iran would attack the oil assets of the Gulf countries in Saudi, in the UAE, to escalate the crisis in order to increase the cost of any attack on Iranian positions. So this is not going to be something like the 12-day war with Israel. This is going to be something, as the leader of Iran said, regional. The scale is going to be much higher. So the cost, I don't know. It would be very high, but it very depends on the doctrine of Americans' doctrine in the war. But it's not going to be something simple. It's going to be very painful. A lot of casualties are going to be very direct, immediate result of American strike. And I don't know. No one can even guarantee a regime change in Iran because Iran is a very big country. I would say that balkanizing the country would be the main target or main direct consequence of an attack on Iran, which would bring the whole region into more chaos and more geopolitical risk. But I have very little hope that a deal can be reached. I'm not saying it's not going to be reached. The chance is very little. It depends whether Iran is going to accept the very complex conditions of Americans. Iran for decades have emphasized that it's not going to give up uranium enrichment, left apart forever. This is one of the conditions of Americans. The proxies of Iran are part of its ideologic and defense strategy in the region. And missile is the sole applicable tool of Iranian military in terms of creating a level of deterrence against Israel and other actually forces in the region. So this is going to be very complex. This is going to be very out of reach, but maybe, I don't know.
They're certainly not a very optimistic sense and consequential. And I think at least the variety of points you make, I think one thing I would say, and I've been saying it all week, is that the oil markets seem to be pricing in the best case scenario here rather than some of the indicators that you're pointing towards. Let's go to India, which is obviously somewhat vulnerable to this. Vibhuti Garg, Director, South Asia at IEEFA. Vibhuti, given the scale of the concerns that were articulated there by Daniel, clearly India, as one of the world's largest oil importers, must be getting increasingly nervous about US-Iran tensions. How resilient is India's economy to a major disruption of Gulf energy supplies?
Thanks, Sean. I think, firstly, just responding as a common citizen, I hope peace and sanity prevails and we have no more wars, because it's been few years of this increasing geopolitical tensions, and common citizens like us have just to face the brunt of living in these uncertain conditions all the time. But coming back to the question, I think as far as India is concerned, I think the sanctions that were imposed earlier, we are not buying directly from Iran, but definitely if it kind of hurts the Middle East route, that's when India will get impacted. But again, it's not just about the volume of crude oil, but it's more also in terms of increasing prices that we have started witnessing in the last few weeks when these conditions have started developing more. India was the kind of import, the crude prices were in the order of $60 by end of last year and $65 at the beginning of this year, and now it's increasing. As you mentioned, we are not seeing those extreme price volatility right now, but if the situation further worsens, we might see much, much higher prices, and that's where it will start hurting India's fiscal stability because of its huge dependence of oil. But at the same time, what is also happening that India has diversified its, trading partners. So we did started increase supply from Russia, but again, because of pressure from US, those supplies in the last 2 months have gone down, specifically in the month starting January this year. We have seen about 23% reduction, even in Russian imports, but on the other hand, the imports from US has gone up. So there has been some, I would say, change in trading partners and change in diversifying more suppliers for meeting the demand. And so that's one strategy that India has adopted. On the other hand, giving a lot of push to clean energy transition, clean electric vehicles, offer a longer term cushion. It's not something which India will be able to kind of, address immediately. But yes, in the long term, that's how India is trying to alleviate
and of course, India doesn't have much storage, right? We're seeing China's been building its storage sort of in anticipation of the dark, rainy day, and it seems that's coming perhaps, but in many different ways. But India doesn't have that capacity, doesn't have a storage, so it does rely heavily on continuous imports every day of the week, right?
That's correct. So I think that's something which, again, maybe India needs to consider seriously. We do have a lot of refinery capacity, but we don't have the storage capacity. So it depends on everyday flows.
Let's go to London to Ron Busso, Reuters Open Interest energy columnist, always writing very insightfully, Ron, on all of these topics. Of course, big event this weekend as well. OPEC Plus is meeting on Sunday to decide their policy for the second quarter. As you look at that, you had a column out today, I think it was, sort of articulating that this terrible situation that may give OPEC some cover. Your thoughts on the decision they're facing and where they're likely to take it?
Yeah, I think it's a very hi everyone, and thanks for having me. I think it's a very complex background for OPEC to meet and decide on their next output move. Clearly, OPEC Plus throughout the years has actually navigated pretty well geopolitical tensions, in as much as they managed to set them aside when it came to sanctions on Russia and focus really on the market fundamentals. But this time, it's there's so many big moving parts that it really makes it quite unusual for OPEC Plus. But I think for them and Saudi Arabia in particular, the imperative will be to show that they're still in control of their own narrative, at least, which is Q1 pause is over. Now we can start returning to modest increases in output, because OPEC and OPEC Plus fundamentally believe that the market is way more balanced in terms of supply and demand than the IEA, for example, says. So I think we are likely going to see OPEC Plus agreeing on a small increase of 137,000 BPD in at least in the production quota, which probably won't translate to as much in actual production.
I mean, what are you seeing, Ron, if I might just interject on this, that this is already happening, that the obviously OPEC Plus due to meet on Sunday, 1st of March and so forth, go through the formalities of the process of convening and consensus and so on. But ultimately, OPEC Plus and its respective individual members, particularly those who can, are already increasing. At least the tanker rates are telling us that. The reporting is telling us that the loadings are well underway, this sort of excess increase beyond the current quotas.
Absolutely. And that's another second very interesting element that we're seeing. A bit of a repeat from last year's 12-day war between Israel and Iran. But we're definitely seeing in recent days that Saudi Arabia and the UAE have increased their exports significantly. That's quite visible. Saudi is almost touching 7 million BPD in exports for February already. And the UAE has increased them quite significantly as well. And at the same time, we're also hearing that Saudi Arabia has increased its, or starting to increase its production too, as a preemptive measure ahead of possible disruption due to war. We don't know exactly, but we're definitely seeing much higher exports from these two key countries. They're trying to get oil onto tankers and out of the Gulf area in order to guarantee their supply commitments to buyers, particularly in Asia. So yeah, that's an interesting dynamic for sure.
Daniel, you mentioned in your earlier comments there, one of the outcomes, if this all gets kinetic and conflict emerges in the region, we both share either side of the Gulf waters, that the balkanization of Iran may be one of the outcomes. And many people may or may not be familiar with the fact that, Iran has very definitive, structure of its culture and society and ethnic groups and so forth, and geographies, and has that vulnerability in the way that we saw in the aftermath of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, and still hasn't really recovered the sort of beautiful holistic fabric that Iraq used to be in all of its sort of combination of rich ancient cultures and peoples. In terms of Iran and sort of looking selfishly through the the prism of the oil and gas industry. In the Balkanization structure, like we saw in Syria, for example, most of the hydrocarbons were located in the Kurdish region of Syria, which of course was under Kurdish control for most of the 15 years of the civil war, but has since returned to central government, but it had been relatively preserved. And I'm wondering, in the context of Iran, if one was to see Iran get sort of split up into pieces, is the oil and gas reserves in one piece that could be carved off and sort of taken away?
In terms of the geographic distribution of the locations of the major oil fields of Iran, most of Iranian oil is located in the southern part of the country. A lion's share of that is in one single province, in Khuzestan province, which is comparatively, let's say, half or 45% of the population are Arabs. And the rest of that are either from lower ethnicity or the people from central Iran who have migrated there for work and due to the jobs. So if Khuzestan province is separated, which I give it a very, very low chance in the case of any balkanization of the country. It used to be the case 50 years ago, 45 years ago, when we were in war with Iraq, and that was the intention of Iraqi invasion on Iran. But at the moment, there are not many significant or powerful, actually, separatist movements in Khuzestan. There are some, but they are not capable. In the case that any strong central government remains in Tehran, Khuzestan lower minority, actually, the ethnicity, they are part of the Iranic population. We have Iranic, actually, people, and we have non-Iranic peoples here within the borders of the ancient Persian Empire or Iran, contemporary Iran. For example, Arabs are non-Iranic peoples. The Turks and Azeris are non-Iranic people, but Kurds are Iranic people. But it does not necessarily mean that one wants to get separated and the other not. Kurds have some historical demand for actually establishing their own country within Iran, Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. So they are another story. But in Khuzestan, I don't believe that there is a high chance for separation. The second part, the second very oil-rich part of the country is the Persian Gulf. Persian Gulf, is a very, all the northern coast of the Persian Gulf is on Iranian borders. Limited part of that is in Khuzestan province. Most of that is in Bushehr and Hormozgan province, which there is not very high chance for, actually nothing, no significant demand for separationism or balkanizing. So major gas reserves of the country are located in the Persian Gulf. So in terms of gas, there is very little chance of any potential actually separation in the existing situation of the gas belongings to the country. In oil, I would say it has little chance, but more than the Persian Gulf itself. So yes, but in other parts of the country, for example, in Kurdistan, in Baluchistan, which is also another possibility of, in any case, let's say, heavens forbid, but in any case that the country gets into the catastrophe of balkanization, I don't see any major oil reserve being at that risk if Khuzestan's situation in terms of demands for separation, which is very low at the moment, remains at the current level. But if a kind of, I call it social history becomes dominant in the country, maybe Khuzestan's demand for separation would increase, but not at the moment. The major risk is now from Kurdistan. But please, John, let me add something about oil deliveries of Iran as well.
Okay.
Iran's oil deliveries to the market has remained about 1.5, 1.6 million barrels exports. But the deliveries from Iranian actually floating reserves to Chinese refiners have been declining very significantly. It's now about 1.2 million barrels or even less. So the war, despite actually the sentiments in the market that you should buy as much as you can or you should send as much oil as you can to the market, the Iranian deliveries to China have declined significantly. And that's a very negative signal for Iran because it appears that China or the whole network is not supporting Iran's very critical financial actually situation at the moment.
By buying, by reducing their purchasing of Iranian oil, they're basically
Right.
signaling that, sorry, mate, you're on your own.
Exactly. And you know, there are some, you know, high level officials, including the president, blaming China for not remaining on its obligations about Iran.
Let's go again to India, Vibhuti. Clearly, we've talked there, and Daniel giving us very useful insights on from the perspective there. But India has also been reducing significantly its imports of Russian crude oil, which of course it had become quite attuned to in recent years. I'm just wanted to get your thoughts quickly on that and the economic and market impacts of reduced Russian oil ports for India.
I think one of the reasons why possibly China is reducing its commitment or supplies from Iran could also be because now the Russia is providing China with very discounted rates to, you know, offering premium of $10 to $12 per barrel. So everywhere, I think it's more at times economics driving these decisions. And as far as the US, as far as India is concerned, yes, you know, reduced supply from Russia, which was being offered at discounted prices, which means then you're reducing refinery margins, particularly for private refineries that benefited, you know, from processing these discounted Russian crude for export markets. And from a supply standpoint, you know, India has been looking at diversifying sources, but this shift increases exposure to global benchmark prices and freight costs, making fuel prices and inflation, you know, more sensitive to geopolitical shock. So the risk is less about physical shortage, but it is also more about higher import bills, margin pressure, and increased market volatility. And specifically, you know, again, India imports a lot of its oil from Middle East. And if there are disruptions in that route, then again, I think there will be some supply crunch as well, because a lot of India's imports is now coming from Middle East as well.
Interesting. Ron, when we consider all of these elements and the obviously the dynamic of supply is articulated, most notably we mentioned there the challenge that could come to the Gulf, could come to Iran, and of course these are significant. Iran by itself is a significant amount of exported oil. Supply is being accelerated from other Gulf states in order to maybe create some comfort in the market. But where is demand ultimately for all of this oil? And we've been hearing so long about this surplus. There does seem to be in some ways a tale of two cities here, in the sense that inventories are still reasonably low in Europe and elsewhere, while they've been building in China and so forth, that there is still a tightness. Demand is still solid enough there if one looks through all of the noise of the potential for war between the US and Iran.
Yes, I mean, we're definitely seeing demand relatively stable. I think maybe in the last few weeks, we've seen signs of oversupply in the physical market in terms of diffs and CFDs and the Brent, also the contracts indicating that the physical market is becoming a bit more loose than previously. But in terms of demand, we're definitely not seeing particularly significant impact from the higher prices, at least not for now. Of course, the big element, the big question is China's buying, because that has been the defining kind of part of the equation, whether glut or no glut, for the past year, I would say. And if we are possibly starting to see sign that China has been slowing down buying, so if it over the last few weeks, we will only see it flowing into China in the next 2 months or so. So there might be signs that the current prices have put off some Chinese buyers, which would lead to lower imports and lower storage levels in China, which would be a significant change from the past year or so. And that would be probably the most significant change to the demand side of things, which would lead to the availability of much more crude, if that is indeed the case. But otherwise, I don't think we're seeing significant demand destruction in the face of kind of oil at 70 so far.
Let's go to the survey question, which is sort of the point I touched on earlier with Ron, and that was OPEC Plus meeting on March 1st will rubber stamp an oil supply increase that has already started. The idea that OPEC Plus was it is meeting on Sunday, March 1st, to decide what to do from April 1st. But ultimately, the flow has already started in what is now February, and tankers are being loaded, et cetera, et cetera. The numbers that Ron mentioned there, record numbers, are soon near record levels of Saudi exports and at 7 million barrels a day, et cetera. So where is this meeting is happening, but ultimately the increase has already started. Daniel, a few minutes left here. Of course, this is a Friday. I had the sense yesterday that it was sort of the last sort of stop, the last chance saloon, if you like. The meeting in Geneva did seem to come away with the Omanis saying that they've agreed to hold more meetings, and then the weekends have been a time in which we've seen things happen. Your thoughts of whether you take the Omanis to be accurate, that that there's still legs perhaps in this discussion?
According to the official news we have received, Americans in the very beginning of the meetings and the talks rejected Iran's proposal, and they asked Iran to take a very hard decision, which is disrupting the whole enrichment infrastructure, not only closing them, shutting them down, but also disrupting the whole infrastructure Iran has built for several years. And that has cost the country hundreds of billions of dollars of losses. And at the same time, they have said that Iran should accept that there would be no sunset in its nuclear restrictions, which means that Iran would be the first and the sole country in the whole world that has accepted no uranium or any radioactive material enrichment forever and ever without any censor. And in return, Iran will only receive limited sanctions relief, which can increase in accordance with Iran's. Can you hear me, friend?
Yeah, clearly, crystal.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I'm always thinking.
No, the line is the best it's ever been. So ironically, it's the most
I was
crystal
just
clear.
thinking, they're just saying that, okay, there would be limited sanctions relief, and Iran should accept this, and that would be little bit more and little coming more sanction reliefs according to Iran's compliance. So this is a translation of what they have asked Iran to accept is kind of surrender. And surrender would cost Iran very much in terms of its ideologic, approach, ideologic expansionism, whatever we can call it. So Iran has asked them for a limited time to come back to the capital and discuss with the leaders, the Iranian envoy. But when they reached Iran, even before reaching Iran, in their TV interviews, they said that what you're hearing in the news is not what we talked in the talks with Americans. So this is very confusing. We are not going to know what they have told each other. The Omani's foreign minister, Mr. Busaidi, is going to DC to talk with American officials in terms of actually trying to make a deal between Iran and the US. But in general, whatever comes out of, if there would be a deal, this is going to change the face of the whole region. Iran cannot continue as what it used to do in the region. Iran should come down. Iran should start working on its economy if there is any deal. But if Iran, by any chance, accepts to actually to give up its missile program, that would increase the risks of a Lebanese-like Israeli strikes on Iran, and this is going to make the situation more complex. So I think Iran would accept a nuclear deal, which would make Americans satisfied. But in terms of its defense capabilities, there would be no chance for negotiations. So it really depends on how much they are going to emphasize. Americans are going to emphasize on Iran's missile capabilities.
May I just follow up quickly as we're running over time? That is there any are people leaving Tehran? We saw in the war last June, people, after the bomb started dropping, tried to leave Tehran. Is there any sort of that type of social reaction yet?
No, not at the moment, but huge capital flight is visible. Everybody who has a, let's say, big asset or comparatively big asset is trying to take its assets out of Iran. Many, the demand for US dollar in the free market is very high. The demand for Tether and cryptocurrencies are very high. Many businesses are just delivering their assets to the UAE or other countries to protect their actually assets from any possible war, which no one really can understand what the scale of the war would be.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I hope Ron and Vibhuti apologize that we've allowed Daniel sort of obviously most of the airtime. We can understand why, given the situation today. 2-1 here in the room believe that this oil supply increase has already started. We'll wrap it up there and hope we're still debating the possibilities of things on Monday and that we don't have a weekend where all things start to get kinetic. On this side of the water, we're also very concerned, and 100 million Iranians, I'm sure, go to bed this weekend also very concerned. We're all pawns in a big man's game that we're not really party of, and we just have to live with that. Ron Busso, thank you so much. Lovely to have you on the podcast, and hopefully you'll be back soon. Vibhuti Garg, as always, great to have your voice and insights from India, and Daniel Ramat, nobody better to give us the lie of the land there. Best of luck, Daniel. Hopefully everything works out for the better. Take care. Have a great weekend, and talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Cheers,
you,
Daniel.
Sean. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. Bye-bye.